Jackie mentioned a book, The Best Christmas Pageant Ever, which has long been a favorite of mine. In fact, my mom and I share a copy that we kind of pass back and forth every Christmas to read. In the story, there's a young girl, and she is doing the Christmas pageant like she does every year. She's kind of bored with the whole thing. But this year is different. First of all, the lady who normally directs it can't direct it, so her mother is directing it. And the second thing that happens is the herdmans. The herdmans. So the herdmans are the bullies in town, the big bullies of the school, hurting, beating up everybody. And they heard that there were refreshments at church, so they came to church and then demanded that they get all the lead parts in the Christmas pageant. Rehearsals were a little chaotic, a lot of antics going on. The fire department showed up. But eventually, it was the day for the Christmas pageant. This is part of The Best Christmas Pageant Ever by Barbara Robinson. On the night of the pageant, we didn't have any supper because Mother forgot to fix it. My father said that was all right because between Mrs. Armstrong's telephone calls and the pageant rehearsals, he didn't expect supper anymore. When it's all over, he said, we'll go someplace and have hamburgers. But Mother said that when it was all over, she might want to go someplace and hide. We've never gone through the whole thing, she said. I don't know what's going to happen. It may be the first Christmas pageant in history where Joseph and the wise men get in a fight and Mary runs away with the baby. She might be right, I thought, and I wondered what all of us in the angel choir ought to do in case that happened. It would be dumb for us just to stand there singing about the Holy Infant if Mary had run off with him. But nothing seemed very different at first. There was the usual big mess all over the place, baby angels getting poked in the eye by other baby angel wings, and grumpy shepherds stumbling over their bathrobes. The spotlight swooped back and forth and up and down till it made you sick at your stomach to look at it. And as usual, whoever was playing the piano pitched Away in a Manger so high we could hardly hear it, let alone sing it. My father says, Away in a Manger always starts out sounding like a closet full of mice. But everything settled down, and at 7:30, the pageant began. We sang 2 verses of O Little Town of Bethlehem, and then we were supposed to hum some more O Little Town of Bethlehem, while Mary and Joseph came in from a side door. Only they didn't come right away. So we hummed, and hummed, and hummed, which is boring and also very hard, and before long doesn't sound like any song at all anymore. It sounds more like an old refrigerator. I knew something like this would happen, Alice Windlekin whispered to me. They didn't come at all. We don't have any Mary and Joseph, and now what are we supposed to do? I guess we would have all gone on humming till we all turned blue, but we didn't have to. Ralph and Imogene were there all right, only for once, they didn't come through the door pushing each other out of the way. They just stood there for a minute as if they weren't sure they were in the right place. Because of the candles, I guess, and the church being full of people. They looked like the people you see on the 6 o'clock news. Refugees sent to wait in some strange, ugly place with all their boxes and sacks around them. It suddenly occurred to me that this was just the way it must have been for the real Holy Family. Stuck away in a barn by people that didn't much care what happened to them. They couldn't have been very neat and tidy either, but more like this Mary and Joseph. Imogene's bell was cockeyed as usual, and Ralph's hair stuck out all around his ears. Imogene had the baby doll, but she wasn't carrying it the way she was supposed to, cradled in her arms. She had it slung out over her shoulder, and before she put it in the manger, she thumped it twice on the back. I heard Alice gasp, and she poked me. I don't think it's very nice to burp the baby Jesus, she whispered, as if he had colic. Then she poked me again. Do you suppose he could have had colic? I said, I don't know why not. And I didn't. He could hungry like any other baby. After all, what was the whole point of Jesus? That he didn't come down on a cloud like something out of Amazing Comics, but he was born and he lived a real person. Next came Gladys from behind the angel choir, pushing people out of the way and stepping on everyone's feet. Since Gladys was the only one in the pageant who had anything to say, she made the most of it. "Hey, unto you a child is born!" she hollered, as if it were, for sure, the best news in the world. And all of the shepherds trembled, sore afraid. Of Gladys mainly, but it looked good anyway. The boys sang "We Three Kings of Orient Are," and everyone in the audience shifted around to watch the wise men march up the aisle. "What have they got?" Alice whispered. I didn't know, but whatever it was heavy. Leroy almost dropped it. He didn't have the frankincense jar either, and Claude and Ollie didn't have anything, although they were supposed to bring the gold and the myrrh. "I knew this would happen," Alice said for the second time. "I bet it's something awful." "Like what?" "Like a burnt offering. You know, the herdmans." Well, they did burn things, but they hadn't burned this yet. It was a ham. And right away, I knew where it came from. My father was on the church charitable works committee, and they give away food baskets at Christmas. And this was the herdman's food basket ham. It still had the ribbon around it saying "Merry Christmas." "I bet they stole that," Alice said. They did not. It came from their food basket. And if they want to give away their own ham, I guess they can do it. But even if the herdmans didn't like ham, that was Alice's next idea. They had never before in their lives given anything away except lumps on the head. So you had to be impressed. Leroy dropped the ham in front of the manger. It looked funny to see a ham there instead of the fancy bath salt jars we used for myrrh and frankincense. And then they went and sat down in the only space that was left. While we sang, "What child is this?" the wise men were supposed to confer among themselves and then leave by a different door so everyone would understand that they were going home another way. But the herdmen forgot, or didn't want to, or something, because they didn't confer and they didn't leave either. They just sat there, and there wasn't anything anyone could do about it. "They're ruining the whole thing," Alice whispered, but they weren't at all. As a matter of fact, it made perfect sense for the wise men to sit down and rest, and I said so. They're supposed to have come a long way. You wouldn't expect them to just show up, hand over the ham, and leave. As for ruining the whole thing, it seemed to me that the herdmans had improved the pageant a lot, just by doing what came naturally, like burping the baby, for instance, or thinking a ham would be a better present than a lot of perfumed oil. Usually by the time we got to Silent Night, which was always the last carol, I was fed up with the whole thing and couldn't wait for it to be over. But I didn't feel that way this time. I almost wished for the pageant to go on, with the herdmans in charge. Everyone sang Silent Night, including the audience. We sang all the verses too. And when we got to "Son of God loves pure light," I happened to look at Imogen, and I almost dropped my hymn book on a baby angel. Everyone had been waiting all this time for the herdmans to do something absolutely unexpected. And sure enough, that was what happened. Imogen Herdman was crying. In the candlelight, her face was all shiny with tears, and she didn't even bother to wipe them away. She just sat there, awful old Imogen, in her crookedy veil, crying and crying and crying. Well, it was the best Christmas pageant we ever had. And this was the funny thing about it. For years, I thought about the wonder of Christmas and the mystery of Jesus' birth and never really understood it. But now, because of the herdmans, it didn't seem so mysterious after all. When Imogen had asked me what the pageant was about, I told her it was about Jesus. But that was just part of it. It was about a new baby and his mother and father who were in a lot of trouble. No money, no place to go, no doctor, nobody they knew. And then arriving from the east, like my uncle from New Jersey, some rich friends. But Imogene, I guess, didn't see it that way. Christmas just came over her all at once, like a case of chills and fever. And so she was crying and walking into the furniture. When we came out of the church that night, it was cold and clear, with crunchy snow underfoot and bright, bright stars overhead. And I thought about the angel of the Lord, Gladys, with her skinny legs and her dirty sneakers sticking out from under her robe, yelling at all of us everywhere, "Hey, unto you a child is born."
Oh.